Sleepovers were always an event that I really looked forward to when I was younger. Getting a group of friends together for a hangout that got to take place over the course of an entire evening seemed like an adventure. The night of my 8th grade birthday party started like many sleepovers in the past. We spent a considerable amount of time outside on the cool spring day playing basketball and throwing the football around. It was a bit of a tradition to play two-hand touch football during these gatherings. Around 8 p.m. we went inside and ate some pizza and played video games. This was before online gaming was a huge thing, so instead we played 1-versus-1 matchups in various games. This pretty much remained the status quo for most of the night. It was not until around 2 in the morning that things started to take a very strange and sinister turn for the worst. Around this time we were amped up from all the sugar and soda we had consumed throughout the evening. We were being rambunctious little teenagers and bouncing off the walls. One of my friends thought he was being funny and decided to dare me to sit outside on my front porch by myself for a whole 5 minutes, and if I could do it, he would pay me $10. Some of my friends insisted on calling me a coward and saying there's no way I would do it, but I of course did not want to look like a fool, so I agreed to go out there by myself. Now, it is important to note here that we used to kid around as younger kids that my house was haunted. It of course was not, but that was the running story, so a lot of my friends were saying that there was no way that they would go out there alone. I got out onto the porch and my friends very promptly slammed the door behind me. I could hear the laughs and giggles from behind the door. What an easy way to make $10, I thought. The porch that I was sitting on was a totally enclosed porch surrounded by windows. The front of my house had 6 steps that went up to a front door. Through the door was the screened-in, enclosed porch. Then from this room was the front door to the house. It was a rectangular room probably 30 feet across and only 4 or 5 feet from door to door. The room was lined with a row of chairs and tables to sit in. My parents were smokers, so there were ashtrays on the table and lingering smells of smoke. The first minute or so I sat there and honestly kind of enjoyed the peace and quiet of the night. The quiet abruptly shifted into an unnerving sound. I looked out one of the windows and saw a figure walking down the middle of my street pushing an empty shopping cart. The figure was moving slowly and almost methodically. The figure was dark, only being lit up by the orange glow of the streetlights on my quiet street. The shopping cart gave up an unsettling and screechy sound. The figure was wearing a long trench coat and some kind of hat. I admit, at this point, I was shaken, but not scared. I figured it was just some creepy homeless man. The red flags and fear came over me only a moment later. The figure stopped in front of my house, but was still standing in the middle of the road. He was as still as a statue, just standing there looking forward. I sat slouched in my chair, staring out the window. There was no way the figure could see me staring at him. It was pitch black, and I was about 4 feet away from the window on a completely dark porch. My worst nightmares were coming true as I sat there nearly petrified. The figure slowly let go of the cart and turned to face the front of my home. I felt my heart sink into my stomach. Though the figure was not doing anything, the eeriness of his presence made me panic. Only moments had passed, but it felt like an eternity as the figure just stared at me. My logic told me there was no way he was staring at me, but I swear it felt like he was. Standing in the middle of the road, he was about 50 feet away. With no warning whatsoever, the figure made a mad dash at my house. The slow-walking figure sprinted, and within seconds was completely out of sight. In absolute desperation and panic, I banged on my front door, screaming to my friends to let me in. I was met with jabs and insults for not staying out there for the full 5 minutes, but I did not care. I slammed the door behind me and locked the door. I immediately told everyone to shut up and turn off all the lights. My friends began to panic and could not tell if this was a joke or if it was real. Somehow my tears and terror in my body did not give it away. We sat quietly in a dark room, with only the streetlight shining through the windows. We could hear footsteps walking all around the house, but we didn't see anything in the shadows. I was too scared to run upstairs and get my parents. This was the only time in my life that I felt crippling terror. The man began to tap on the window in the dining room, light taps, and whispering, "Hello, children, I know you're in there." The dining room was on the side of the house, and I would have to go through that room to get to the stairs to wake my parents. The man tapped on each window and whispered some more, saying the same thing at each window. "Hello, children, I know you're in there." When he finally made his way to the backyard, I sprinted to my parents' room and told them what happened. My dad sprang from the bed and ran outside with a baseball bat, and my mom called the police, who showed up in minutes. When my dad got outside, there was no sign of the man anywhere. A few muddy footprints on the deck, in the backyard, in the shopping cart, in the middle of the street. That was all we had for any kind of evidence. We filed the report and the police left. We felt some reassurance because the cop said that he would stay in the area tonight. My dad stayed up in the living room and watched SportsCenter all night. We all just tried to sleep, but we were just too scared. Morning came and we all slept, maybe a couple of hours at most. The joy and excitement that we had early in the night was completely deflated. That morning, one by one, my friends got picked up, and my parents made sure to talk to all of their parents. That way they heard it straight from the source, as opposed to a young teenager telling their parents the cops were called. I really struggled to sleep after that for many years. This person never showed up again, at least not to my knowledge. My dad slept in the living room for years after that and would routinely go outside and look around the house. I used to think that my dad caught the guy, but I never knew for sure. As an adult, I think of different ways I could have handled that situation, but I only acted in the moment. But now, as a 30-year-old man, I still will never get that image of that man sprinting at my house out of my head. My house may not have been haunted, but the memory of that evening will haunt me for the rest of my life.
This is a short story that happened to me several years ago when I was a senior in high school. All of my friends got to travel to Myrtle Beach with the baseball team for spring break, but since I didn't play baseball, I was stuck at home. My one friend Dave was home too, since we were the skaters of the friend group. We spent most nights of break hanging out together and not doing much. Toward the end of break, we snuck out of the house to see a girl who lived near my house. Since her and a few of the other girls from school were still in town, we figured we would hang out with them. We had an awesome time hanging out with them. I liked this girl too at the time, so it was great to be able to spend this time with her. When we were walking back to the house that night, Dave noticed some guy following us, and I didn't really think anything of it. He was freaked out, and I told him to just relax. The guy was following us closely, but not close enough that we should have been panicked. When we made it to my house, I watched the guy continue walking, and he never looked back. I looked at my buddy and I told him that he was freaked out for nothing. The next night we hung out again, and my parents were going out of town for the weekend, so I was going to have the house to myself. Since I was sort of embarrassed by my house, I told the girls we couldn't hang out there, so Dave and I walked to her house again. This time, we spent a considerable amount of time there. We didn't walk home until after 3 o'clock in the morning. Dave was relieved on the way home that we didn't have anybody following us this time. I closed up my house, and we got comfortable in the living room before passing out on the couches. Not long after lying down, we heard a knock on the door. We both froze. "What the hell was that?" Dave exclaimed. Then the knock came again. It was a low and rhythmic knock. Each bang on the wood made my hair stick up. I slowly got up, and standing a few feet from the door, I shouted, "Who is it?" There was no response right away. Then a young female voice shouted from the other side, "Hey, I was wondering, can I please hide inside?" I didn't say anything right away. The absurd nature of this statement and the calm tone of her voice left me speechless. Before I said anything, she spoke again. "It's gonna be too late if you don't let me in. Can I please hide inside your house?" I decided not to answer, and neither did Dave. We sat in silence. Then I noticed the doorknob turning back and forth, first slowly, and then more aggressively. Then, the calm voice got instantly more sinister when she said, "Open the damn door right now." I finally shouted, "Go away! I'm gonna call the police." There was no sounds for a few seconds. Then a second voice could be heard from behind the door. It was a deep voice from a man, and he said,
"Good call, bud."
It sounded like footsteps walking away. So I looked out of the window and I saw two figures walking down the street. The one figure looked suspiciously like the figure from the night before. We were terrified and sat awake for the rest of the night. Since my parents weren't home, we didn't call the police, even though we should have. I have no idea what these two wanted. I don't even like being outside at night anymore. This night messed me up for a long time, and I'm still trying to recover from the mental nightmare that I endured that night.
The events of this story still make me think back to that night, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. The events that took place on this treacherous night were about 10 years ago from the moment I am writing this story. My friends and I were 17 years old and spent most of our weekends with each other, a habit that started back in elementary school, playing video games and sleeping at each other's houses. All through middle school and high school, this was our weekend routine. At one point during senior year, we decided that we wanted to mix things up a little bit. It was myself who had a license and a car at this point, and my two friends Robbie and Scott. My parents trusted us because, all things considered, we were good kids. The night started out like most nights. Scott and Robbie showed up at the house to sleep over for the night. We ordered some pizza, played some games, and just talked about school for a little bit. Shortly after 11 p.m., we decided to go for a ride, for no other reason than to listen to some music and have some good conversation. We just drove for a while, turning down roads we didn't know even existed. Without the GPS that I had in my car, this was all before all cell phones had a GPS, we would have been hopelessly lost. Around midnight, maybe a little later, we were driving down a really scary and very poor lit road in seemingly the middle of nowhere when we approached a car that was on the side of the road. But it was not just parked on the side of the road, it was somewhat crooked and the hood was tucked into the shrubs, almost as if the car lost control and got into an accident. The red taillights were still giving off a soft glow on the road. Robbie suggested we look in case someone fell asleep at the wheel or something, like maybe someone was hurt. If someone had gotten into an accident, it would have taken hours for paramedics to find him if we didn't act. We slowly and cautiously approached the vehicle. It was an older red Honda Civic. We got out of the car slowly and began approaching it. Robbie said in a brave voice, "Hey, is anybody there? Are you hurt?" No response at all. As we got closer, I shouted, "Wait!" I started to make out the silhouette of a figure in the back seat, just sitting upright. Robbie shouted again, this time with a bit of urgency in his voice, "Hey, are you okay?" But again, there was no response. No noise at all, except for the motor of the car running several feet behind us. After a moment, Robbie firmly said whatever and approached the red car, and we followed closely behind him even though I knew this felt wrong. We were all stricken with immediate fear as we went up to the window. There was in fact a figure in the back seat, but more hauntingly, it was a mannequin, not an actual person. My first thought was, who the heck would drive around with essentially a lifelike doll in the back seat? Admittedly, we got a good laugh out of this for a moment, but then the paranoia of the situation came back. Robbie continued to scream if anybody needed help or assistance, but still no response. That is when I noticed that the mannequin had something in its plastic hands. It was a VHS tape. Without thinking, I took the tape, and I did not even tell my friends until later that night. We decided to call the police, which should have been done in the first place, and report the abandoned car. The police asked for the license plate number, and this is when we noticed there was no license plate on the car. Whoever ditched this car either did not have plates or took the plates with them, and all they left behind was a creepy mannequin and an old VHS tape. So we made out our statement, told the cops the location of the car, and left. Later that night, while we were talking about the incident and just how crazy everything was, this is when I told my friends about the tape I took. In shock and perhaps a bit upset I did not mention it to them before, they of course wanted to watch it right away. On the front of the tape was a plain white sticker that had "Watch Me" written in black marker with a very crudely drawn skull and crossbones. I had some pause, but decided that we had to watch it. Curiosity was getting the best of all of us at this point. I found my parents' old VCR in the crawl space and I hooked it up to the TV. The tape began with about 5 seconds of black screen with just the sound of static tone. Then a man came up on the screen with a beard and long hair. The quality of the tape was really bad. He stared into the camera almost as if he were staring right at us. He wore a red flannel and sat at a table next to what appeared to be a workbench of some kind. He stared into the lens for 2 straight minutes without saying a word. We timed it out and it was the most unsettling 2 minutes of my entire life. After 2 minutes he laughed and then morphed the laugh into a cry, all while staring directly into the lens, and finally said in a low, monotone voice, "This tape belongs to me, and I know you had it. I will find it again, and you will be sorry." He then followed this with another horrible laugh and cry combo. We then fast forwarded the tape for several minutes and nothing else was said other than a few laughs and just this man staring at the camera. Finally it cut to black and it ended. After a bit of conversation about the situation, being stupid young kids, we decided not to give the tape to the police. I kept it, and after all of these years the tape still sits on my bookcase. I will never watch it again, and I have never even really spoken about this event until now writing it down. I am sure this was some kind of elaborate prank, but to us kids this was something that burned into our brains for years, and I am still scarred by the mental images I witnessed that night. Every time I see a man that resembles the man from that tape, even after all these years, I still get a pit in my stomach and am reminded of the fear and paranoia that I felt on that evening.